It's incredibly easy to fall into the habit of consuming media you're already comfortable with. For years, the types of video games I played rarely changed. I stuck to a few shooters, survival sandbox games, and maybe an RPG every once in a while. My skills always transferred easily from one game to the next, and my mechanics and confidence came naturally.
Oh my god.
Over time, that ease started to feel stagnant, and because of that, these games never asked much of me beyond my time and attention. But every now and then, a game would slip through that comfort zone and leave a lasting impression on me. Persona 5, a JRPG I never expected to connect with, completely reframed my views on life. As a 16-year-old in high school just gaining independence and learning how I wanted to live my life, its time management mechanics and themes of self-discovery, acceptance, and the value of relationships had a huge impact on my own life. Hollow Knight, a Metroidvania I initially avoided because of its tedium and difficulty, taught me the satisfaction of overcoming seemingly insurmountable challenges, and showed me how much creativity and care independent studios bring to the medium of video games. These games didn't just entertain me, they changed how I saw video games entirely. They showed me the kind of experiences this medium is capable of, and the kind of impact they can have on someone. Because of that, these two games still sit firmly in my top 10 of all time, and they've pushed me to keep searching for more games that can do the same. Like how film buffs explore different kinds of movies, or how book lovers dive into all kinds of literature, I've started approaching games with the same openness to new experiences. 2025 ended up being the most diverse year of gaming I've ever had. I played a wide range of games across genres I'd previously ignored, and I've loved the experience of discovering something new again and again. But toward the end of the year, I started to feel comfortable again. I had gone through RPGs, JRPGs, CRPGs, Metroidvanias, Souls-likes, roguelites, platformers, simulators, mysteries, hero shooters, first-person shooters. You get the idea. I felt like I was getting complacent. I felt like I was ready to try out something completely new. And that's when I first seriously considered playing Resident Evil 4, and with it, finally delving into the genre of horror. Now, I hate horror. I've never enjoyed horror movies, and I've always actively avoided horror games. I've never understood the appeal of voluntarily subjecting yourself to fear, especially because fear is such a deeply ingrained survival instinct in humans. Jump scares, in particular, have always bothered me the most, and are largely what I dread the most about the horror genre. Because who doesn't love their heart rate skyrocketing to uncomfortable levels in an instant? So, when I first looked at Resident Evil 4, I was immediately conflicted. On one hand, the action-heavy gameplay looked incredible, and, obviously, so did Leon Kennedy. But on the other hand, Resident Evil had always been the de facto horror franchise to me, and that pushed me away. I had known the reputation that these games had as horror juggernauts, specifically Resident Evil 7 Biohazard, a game I know many consider as one of the scariest horror games ever made. But a friend of mine who was really into the series encouraged me to give it a chance, telling me that Resident Evil 4 was a great entry point. He described it as funny, not overly scary, and more action-focused than the rest of the franchise, comparing it to the type of action you'd find in Doom Eternal, which is my favorite first-person shooter. He even insisted that the game only had 2 big jump scares. Only 2. So, eventually, that reassurance was enough for me to give it a try. To my surprise, I really liked Resident Evil 4. The action gave me a sense of control that made stepping into the darker and more unsettling moments far more bearable. The game had a sense of tension that was always looming, but I never felt helpless knowing I was one suplex away from taking back control. It was definitely still scary at times, but the fast-paced combat and campy tone kept the experience thrilling rather than overwhelming. Resident Evil 4 was able to do what I thought was impossible. It introduced me to the core ideas of horror games in a way that felt accessible, all while letting me play as an absurdly capable and charismatic protagonist. After finishing and loving Resident Evil 4, my friend gifted me Resident Evil 2, and I had already heard plenty about this one. I had seen clips online and reactions from streamers, and everything about it screamed genuine dread and terror. Unlike Resident Evil 4, this game did not advertise itself with action or power fantasy. Instead, it felt like the purest form of horror I'd always tried to avoid. Alongside Resident Evil 7, Resident Evil 2 was a game that had a reputation behind it. What convinced me to try it anyways was familiarity. I already knew Leon, and I had a general idea of how a Resident Evil game might play. And somehow, that was enough for me to just go for it. Resident Evil 2 was not easy for me, but not because it was mechanically difficult. It was difficult because it constantly challenged my comfort while playing. My experience with shooters had trained me to believe that every enemy could and should be dealt with, but Resident Evil 2 actively punished that playstyle. The clunky aiming, bullet-spongy enemies, limited resources, and desperate search for ammo and healing completely changed how I approached every encounter. Each split-second decision felt heavy, and every mistake felt costly. The claustrophobic halls limited my options, and every turn had me full of dread. I remember spending large portions of my playthrough physically shaking, incredibly stressed, and yet completely engaged. I was forced to fight back not only against my enemies, but also against my own instincts, the urge to panic, rush, and waste resources for a sense of safety. It was exhilarating in a way I'd never experienced before. My time in the RPD gave me a true understanding of what horror could be. The interconnected, non-linear environments of a Metroidvania, the constant resource management of a sim, and the need to make quick, often punishing decisions of a Souls-like. These familiar elements created a gameplay loop that was both terrifying and addicting. I learned how survival horror weaponizes limitation, and somehow, I was having far more fun with it than I ever thought I would. That momentum carried me forward to the rest of the series. I enjoyed Resident Evil 3 Remake with far less stress due to its similarity to RE2 and more linear nature. Resident Evil 1 Remake showed me the genre's roots, making me dread every room not so much because of any monsters, but because of the 7-second gore animation I'd need to sit through. Resident Evil Village was a straight-up fun action game that had the same campy tone that RE4 had, but also had quite possibly the scariest section in any of these games. And yet, I still had a great time with it. Finally, I reached Resident Evil 7 Biohazard, the game that originally scared me away from the franchise altogether. It was undeniably unsettling and deeply disturbing, yet to my surprise, it never scared me as much as Resident Evil 2 had. By this point, I'd learned how to exist within fear. I understood the so-called language of the genre, and I knew how to manage the tension rather than fight it. Finishing Resident Evil 7 felt incredible, not because I'd conquered horror, but because it showed me how far I'd come. With the release of Resident Evil Requiem in the coming days, I've now finished Resident Evil 1 through 8, and I've even grabbed the platinum on my favorite 2. And yes, I know I played them in quite possibly the worst order possible. Sue me. So, what compelled me to make this video? First, because I implore you to play this incredible series of games, even if you hate horror like I do. But second, because my time with Resident Evil reminded me about why I love video games. These games didn't reshape my worldview the way Persona 5 did, but they did remind me of something very important to me. Exploring a genre I once thought wasn't for me has helped me remember that comfort doesn't come from avoiding discomfort, it comes from learning how to navigate it. I think Resident Evil taught me to, quite literally, face my fears. By slowly stepping into unfamiliar territory and allowing myself to feel uncomfortable, I discovered some of the most fun and memorable experiences gaming has offered to me. And, as dramatic as it sounds, I started to see the parallel. When I was 16 and in high school, Persona 5 taught me to live my life to the fullest at a time I needed to hear it the most. And I can't help but feel Resident Evil has done something similar. Today, I'm 21 and I'm graduating college in less than 3 months. In a time in my life where I'll be parting ways with my friends, learning to support myself, and stepping into whatever comes next, my experience with Resident Evil reminded me to take chances and be brave. Because what actually scared me about horror games wasn't the monsters. It was the lack of agency, not knowing what to expect, and stepping into the unknown. Scary, but in the way new things tend to be. And now that I think about it, that's exactly what this next stage of my life feels like right now. Resident Evil didn't just teach me how to manage tension in a video game. It reminded me how to live with discomfort instead of running from it. And the more I think about it, the more I realize that fear itself was never the problem. Avoiding it was. Sometimes the games you're most hesitant to play are the ones that impact you the most. And maybe you don't need to play Resident Evil. Maybe horror isn't the thing you've been avoiding. But I'm willing to bet there's a genre you've written off. A game you've convinced yourself just isn't for you. Maybe the next game that you play should scare you. And maybe the next opportunity you take should too.